project. And that tends to be, as I say, right in here where that starts getting steep. And there's just things you do. This is just one example. There are things that you do to evaluate the cost side, to further refine the cost side, and things that you do on the revenue side. And on the cost side, one of the things that you do, for example, is to go do things like this underwater pipeline survey, where it starts out looking something like this is what you see at first, and after you run the AUV, you come up and it adds a lot of definition to the seafloor. And you're looking for things like, are there caverns that you can't go across? Are there features underneath there that are not visible at first that are going to cause you major disruption when you actually try to go in there and install this stuff? This is just one of many, many examples of technical things that you go in and get further refinement on. And the obvious one beyond that, too, is to actually get bids for some of this stuff. I mean, you estimate the cost for all these vessels and all this steel and all these people, and you have to actually go out and get bids for that stuff and start getting that further refined. Those are some of the things you do on the cost side. And you saw something like this just a while ago. On the revenue side, you make projections. You say, is there going to be a market? Is there going to be a market for this gas? And if so, what is the step up going to look like? Because again, when tomorrow comes on, we'll have the capability of flowing 10 BCM from pretty much the start. But the market's not going to be 10 BCM. So what is that revenue profile going to look like over time? And how's that going to impact your economics? So we make projections. We use this particular one was done, and this is old. This was done by Potent about this time last year. And so it's a bit old, but anyway, this is the kind of thing that you do to look at the demand. And a lot of this is pretty subjective, but there's lots of different views on that, but they all converge in a similar place. So now Leviathan. So you saw this picture before and kind of how it lies on Houston, and so here's the Leviathan #1 location. And here is the Leviathan #2 location. And as you know, we've had to move away from that, and we're probably going to be somewhere in here whenever we move over from that. But so this is stepping out to the edges to see, does the container act like we think it does? And I like, when I'm talking to people in the office, I like to call this my pie plate chart, because you're basically looking at something that's this big, and you're extrapolating over something that's 250 square miles. Off of a piece of data that's this big around. So it's quite an extrapolation. So that's what makes necessary going out and doing these appraisal wells. And this is the Pride North America that's on Leviathan. And Leviathan is an export project. I mean, the only way to monetize something that's that size, if it is that size, is to export it. And so we've had a team looking at that for a year of what are the export scenarios for this and how do those play out. So this is just a kind of a neat photo because it doesn't happen every day. This is when, if you remember, when the Setco Express was at Leviathan #1, and we moved it off of Leviathan 1 to go start drilling at Tamar, development drilling at Tamar. This was when it came through that area, and there in the background is the Pride North America in the background. And to give you a sense of sort of how big the structure is that we were looking at there on Leviathan, the distance between these two is about 6 kilometers, and the distance between Leviathan 1 and Leviathan 2 is about 13 kilometers. So it's twice that distance. This is kind of splitting the difference here. So Leviathan is twice that distance that you see between these two rigs and aerial extent. You can see the riser pipe that we have here in the derrick. Obviously, big pipe to go up and start our riser operations tomorrow drilling. So as I said, we're starting an export evaluation for Leviathan now and looking at all the different possibilities. There's pipeline possibilities that mainly have to do with the Cannon Nabucco pipeline or a similar competing pipeline work up in this area here, up in Turkey. But the preponderance of what we look at is LNG options. That's that would seem to be the thing that makes the most sense. And the thing about these LNG options, to give you just a rough idea, a 10 million tons per year facility monetizes about 300 BCM of gas over a period of 20 years. So I mean, that's sort of a very rough idea of how many trains you need on an LNG facility to monetize something like Leviathan. LNG, you have a lot of flexibility with LNG because obviously you can market it in more than one place. It's not tied to just one area. And the demand, we feel really good about what we think about the LNG demand. The studies that we've done and the people that we listen to think that between now and 2030, that the demand for LNG in the world is going to double. And those estimates were out there before the unfortunate things that happened in Japan. So, I mean, with the events that happened in Japan and some people going away from nukes, we actually think it's going to be even more than that now. But this was pre that. So that's the good news. The good news is that there should be a nice growth in the demand for LNG. The bad news is there's a lot of people out there competing for that same market. There's a lot of projects out there that are counting on the same thing, that are queuing up trying to get into that market. And so we're not alone in that. We have to compete with everyone to do that. And the other challenge in all this is that all these things are possible. All these sites here are possible, and these aren't everything. These are a few of the ones that we're looking at. You've probably heard some about these things. But so all of these are possible. None of them are easy. There's pros and cons associated with each one of these up here, and every one of them is hard. Every one of them is hard. And so we're working very hard on that and making some progress, but it is a big challenge to do for the reasons that you can imagine. And so I'm kind of wrapping up here now and just talking about sort of how all this fits together with our picture with Noble Energy's investment picture in 2011. It's just an example of this year. So our investment program for all of Noble is about $2.7 billion this year. And of that $2.7 billion, about that 0.7 is Eastern Mediterranean. So a big expenditure, that's all those things going on. So that 0.7 is Eastern Med, and the rest is in the rest of the world. So that's one slice of it that's kind of this geographic allocation of it. The other slice is kind of what I call the hopper. And the hopper is sort of this conveyor belt, this sort of thing that you can find yourself on, this treadmill that you find yourself on as an exploration and production company. And it's made up of things like this near-term development. And an example here of the near-term development is all this stuff that we're doing on Mary B to enhance the deliverability of Mary B. So there's a lot of capital going into that. That's an example of that kind of development that you have to do, ongoing CapEx. The major projects are things like Tamar, and in West Africa, Aseng, and Santiago in the Gulf of Mexico, and Gunflint in the Gulf of Mexico. Those big capital projects that are in the development stage are in this block right here. And you always have to have exploration. I mean, it gets when you have a lot of big capital projects going on at once. They can be all-consuming, as you might imagine. I mean, they just, from a resource standpoint, internal resource and effort standpoint, emotional standpoint, everything else, they can be all-consuming. But you always have to be looking out there ahead, and you have to make sure that you have really good people that it's their day job to always be out there looking past everything, all the urgency of the day for new places to explore, and looking at places that people kind of say are sort of crazy to get out there and explore. And so that much of it is sort of that piece of the capital expenditure that we have for this year, about $500 million. So anyway, that's sort of how we are split up, and that's a little bit about us and how we're viewing the business. Kind of the last picture, this is just looking back the other way at the Sedco Express. It's only up there because I think it's cool. And so this is the Pride North America looking back, again, I think on that same journey at the Sedco. And that's it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Now, questions? Okay.
Why 216s? A couple of reasons. One is that, it's a good question, one of it is for flexibility. That because of this slow ramp up that we have, if you put one big pipeline instead of two small ones, the velocity in the big pipeline is actually very low. So if you're making liquids, and you're basically climbing up the Rocky Mountains with that grade, and if you get just even a little bit of liquids in something with low velocity, it's a problem. So it's better to have two lines with higher velocity so that you can make sure that you can manage all your liquids going up the hill. That's one of the reasons.
How do you view the role of the Israeli community in
How do you view the role of the Israeli community, the Israeli scientific community in your development?
Well, I think that most of the contact that we have through that community, most of the contact that we have is through the Ministry of National Infrastructure. And so I'm not really familiar with all the ways in which that community is connected, but that's mostly our impact in that. But I guess I would ask you back, what is your view of the community?
My answer is that we need a partnership between this community and you.
We're certainly interested in that.
Okay. Okay, one last question. You haven't touched upon economic or financial aspects of your activities. And my question is about hedging risks. To what extent, I wonder, are you able to use the insurance market, financial instruments, to hedge various risks, particularly duration stay and so forth? Or to what extent are you doing the insurance in-house? In other words, you have enough of a portfolio. Are you using outside insurance? To what extent are you using that?
Right. So the question was, to what extent do we use insurance to manage some of the risk that we have in this? And we do use insurance. And it's just like everything else, I can't even speak to exactly what is covered and what's not, but we do use external insurance, and it tends to be for specific things. And, it was mentioned in these press releases that the issue that we had on Leviathan 2 had insurance coverage on that, and it does. The issue with it is, though, of course, is that it's expensive. And so on each different type of it, we have to evaluate how we feel about the risk of a particular aspect. And then, is it worth what people are wanting to charge us for that insurance? But yeah, we do use it. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.